We are on the road to 2026 and 2028 elections. So that means it's time to start paying attention to potential candidates. I will be covering as many interviews of potential candidates as possible leading into the elections. So to kick it off is Vice President Kamala Harris. She did an interview with Stephen Bartlett from the Diary of a CEO. Now, there are a lot of things in this interview that's worth watching. But I couldn't possibly cover it all. So I strongly urge y'all to go and watch the full interview after this video because it gives you all the tea on who Kamala Harris really is. So before we dive in, just a quick reminder, hit the subscribe button and enable notifications. It really helps us bring you more stories like this. This is Cameron Williams, and welcome to Pragmotiv News.
Again, as an objective observer, the Democratic Party needs to take responsibility for, because the US operates as this sort of two-party system, right, where it's kind of like this person versus this person, left versus right.
Right.
The left lost. They played it wrong. From the Democrats' perspective, they're paying the price of losing the game of chess. And so I think about the Democratic Party and, they can point at the consequences of losing that game, but I feel like the Democratic Party needs to get their shit together so that they don't lose the game again.
I agree.
And that's the personal responsibility point, which is like, how do you stop yourself from finding yourself in a situation where at the last minute, Joe Biden is pulled out with 100 days to go and no one mentioned it. I mean, you say in the book that you at the time thought of it as grace. You talk about this on page 46. You say you thought it was grace to not basically mention that there was a problem and grace not to tell Joe Biden to pull out earlier. Yeah. But actually in hindsight, you now think it was probably reckless not to tell him to pull out.
On my part, yeah.
So what is that to you? What does the Democratic Party need to do to?
First of all, if I had done it over, again, part of the reflection, we had the infrastructure deal. We had the CHIPS Act. So we're building back up America's infrastructure. It's 150 years old. CHIPS is about manufacturing chips, U.S. manufacturing, both incredibly important. If I had to do it over again, I would have first gone with our family policy. That was about extension of the child tax credit, affordable childcare, paid family leave. We needed to deal with the immediate issues affecting the American people. In fact, that's why I ran for the 107 days on those issues, including having Medicare cover, for example, for people in the sandwich generation who are taking care of young children and older parents, Medicare cover home health care, right? Mm-hmm. Why I offered for small businesses that they would get a $50,000 tax credit because nobody can, for startup small businesses, because nobody can start up a small business on a $5,000 tax credit, right? So
Democrats really do need to take responsibility for and own what happened in 2024. We can scream how bad Trump is until we blue in the face. But that doesn't change the fact that people had concerns about Joe Biden's faculties. And the administration should have been more transparent about it. And that's not really on her, that's on Biden's team. So Joe Biden really should have pledged not to run after the 2022 midterms. And now some people say that he should have stepped down completely as president and let Kamala take over from there. But I don't think he should have went that far with it, but he shouldn't have ran. If he had done that, then we wouldn't have had that messy him stepping down and Kamala becoming the nominee, it wouldn't have been messy and it wouldn't have been public. That all of those theatrics hurt our performance in November. That's one thing that could have been better. The other thing is the policy aspect, like what Kamala was saying. President Biden focused on these things that, yes, were great things, like the Chips and Science Act and the Build Back Better that didn't get passed because of Manchin Cinema. But the variation of it, the Inflation Reduction Act, all of that stuff is great stuff, but it takes a while for that kind of stuff to kick in. And not many people know that it takes time for policies to kick in. Once they're passed and signed, it doesn't immediately go into effect. They have to get the logistics of it right. They have to implement the change, and it can take a long time. Sometimes longer than the term. So, and sometimes it's even longer than 8 years. And people don't really know that, so they get mad. And because they didn't feel it immediately. So Kamala is right. They should have focused on things that would provide that would have provided immediate relief to people so they could know something was actually being done.
I think we have to do a better job of also focusing on being a bit more bold. For example, I think we should reduce voting age to 16. I'll tell you why. So, Gen Z, they're age about 13 through 27. They've only known the climate crisis. They missed substantial parts of their education because of the pandemic. If they're in high school or college, especially in college, it is very likely that whatever they've chosen as their major for study may not result in an affordable wage. They've coined the term climate anxiety to describe fear of not only being able to buy a home, but that fear will be wiped out by extreme weather, but fear of having children.
That part.
It is expected that Gen Z will have 10 to 12 jobs in their lifetime. They are a larger number than boomers. They're a specific generation of people who are going to impact our nation and the world. And I think we must invest in them, but I think that they are rightly impatient with a lot of what is the tradition of leadership right now. And if they were able to vote, because they know everything that's happening right now is going to impact them more than anybody older than them, for the most part, in terms of how these systems work. If they're voting right now, at 16 and up, they're going to be talking about the importance of climate. They're going to be talking about the importance of figuring out how AI is going to affect the future of the workforce. They're going to be focused on what are we really doing about affordable housing. And basically in politics, here's the hard truth about this. There are two centers of power that tend to influence how politicians think. Groups that vote the most and people who write the most checks. And I'm going to go every day with the people, and thinking about how do we strengthen people actually going to the polls and voting. Back to my point, in 2024, 1/3 of the electorate didn't vote. Let's focus on why. And are we talking with them? Are we offering them bold solutions? Are we bringing ideas forward that are speaking to their immediate needs? Are we doing it in an effective way? Back to your point about podcasts and other mediums.
I remember seeing people in the comments on the Shade Room back in the middle of the campaign. And they were asking for policies. What's her policies? What's Kamala's policies? And some of them were snarkily asking. So I was like, in the moment, I was like, what are you talking about? She been laid out her policies. Where you been? But now thinking back on it, I now know why they didn't know what her policies were. And it's because the mainstream media dropped the fucking ball, just like they always do these days. They were starting back then. They didn't really report what policies what Kamala would have done. They didn't really report that because they were so distracted by Donald Trump working at McDonald's for a day. And I've been hearing rumblings that whole thing was staged anyway. And then the Democratic Party dropped the ball as well by not getting in on this independent media space back then. And they didn't prioritize going on these podcasts and getting the word out about the policies. Plus, the Democratic policies weren't bold enough. Donald Trump got all of these people to support him for a damn wall. Something so outrageous, something so out there that got everybody's attention. And I'm not saying that we have to be crazy in what policies we put forward. But us Democrats need to ask ourselves, what's our wall? What's our policy that is out there enough to get people's attention, but still doable? So lowering the voting age to 16 is a start. Because I was 15 in 2016, and I knew who I wanted to vote for, and that was Hillary Clinton. And I know kids would be great voters because I've actually been looking at this for a while now. I just haven't. I'm still new at this reporting the news game, and I haven't really had a chance to share this. This is my first opportunity to share this. But I have been paying attention to politics for a long time. And I first noticed that Nickelodeon would have mock elections. And they would tell you about the candidates on the commercial breaks of the shows I used to watch. It was called Kids Pick the President. So I know for a fact that kids do know more than adults give them credit for. And I knew more than what adults gave me credit for. That's why us kids at the time, I was one of those kids, of course, we voted for Barack Obama in both 2008 and 2012. Barack Obama won Kids Pick the President in both 2008 and 2012. Hillary Clinton won Kids Pick the President in 2016. Joe Biden won Kids Pick the President in 2020. And Kamala Harris won Kids Pick the President in 2024. So I say, yeah, let kids vote. Let 16-year-olds vote because they know more than some of these adults out here. And that is growing more and more apparent as we get deeper and deeper into this administration. And I don't see more people realizing how bad they done fucked up by voting him in.
When I was reading your book, 107 Days, one of the really surprising things was, but also makes sense when I understand human nature, was that you talk about how some of the president's staff were basically suppressing you a little bit, suppressing your accomplishments because you're a threat to them. Mm-hmm. And I think you were told pretty early on, or you'd heard pretty early on from a chief of staff that the vice president is kind of seen as a threat to the president.
So the lore has it that the outgoing chief of staff to the president will tell the incoming chief of staff to the incoming president, regardless of political party. Rule number one, watch the vice president. Lore has it that that's the case. And then I had, of course, run against Joe Biden. I was very and acutely aware that I would have to over and over again prove my loyalty, that it wouldn't be assumed.
You say in the book, the president's staff was adding fuel to negative narratives that sprung up about me.
Yeah.
The president's inner circle seemed fine with it. Indeed, it seemed as if they decided I should be knocked down a little bit more.
Yeah.
I was shocked when I read that. But at the same time, understood it. Because it's human nature. But also shocked. Because one wouldn't expect that.
And it was counterproductive. It was absolutely counterproductive.
Was there a particular moment where you realized that this was happening? For the first time?
To be candid with you, I had a sense of it for quite some time, but it was after the election that I really started to hear the stories about it. I mean, I had a sense of it. It was clear to me in terms of just the challenges with getting them to uplift, getting them to defend, especially when there were inaccurate, unfair attacks. And then I started to hear more stories after.
And what you mean by that is when there were unfair media attacks on you that could quite easily have been rebutted or debunked.
Yes.
There was no desire to debunk them. And you talk about in the book as well on page 47 of 107 Days, that they also didn't promote your accomplishments. Because when I read through all the research of the things that you had accomplished, I wasn't aware.
I know.
There doesn't seem to be a megaphone shouting about the things you accomplished. So
it's very frustrating. I can't even tell you. Frustrating and painful.
Really?
And also not just for me, but for the people who knew my career and knew what was not being said and what was being said.
This is something that I mentioned a couple of episodes ago. And for those who didn't see it, I'm going to just reiterate it here. I saw this way back in 2021. I could see it because I always wanted to see a female vice president and a female president. I was really excited about Hillary Clinton at 15 years old. And when that panned out the way it did, I was like, we gonna get it in 2020. I said he will be a one-termer back in 2016, and I meant that shit. And he ended up being a one-term president. And I said the next president gonna be a woman. And when Kamala did run in 2020, I was behind her. But when she had to drop out, and she dropped out before Louisiana primaries came around, so I didn't really have a chance to vote for her. I ended up voting for Joe Biden, and when he chose her as VP, I was really excited. So especially once she finally was in office, I was one of the few, apparently, that actually sought her out. And I was like, why do I have to search for her? Why isn't she doing more things at the White House? And then slowly but surely, I was seeing where she wasn't being allowed to be as out front about things as even Joe Biden was under Barack Obama. So I could tell that way back in 2021. They were silencing her. And it wasn't Joe Biden. I don't think Joe Biden had a part in it. I think it was, again, his team. That's who I have an issue with. So I would want to see her, and then I would have to go on YouTube and actively search for her and find and watch her speeches and watch her talk. And that's why I feel like people didn't see that, because they weren't searching for her. So that's why people felt like she wasn't doing anything as VP, because it wasn't being promoted by the White House and it wasn't being reported on by the media. And of course, the Republicans saw an opportunity and pounced on it. And so nobody knew that Kamala Harris casted the most tie-breaking votes in the U.S. Senate in U.S. history. That's a big feat. That tells you that she was doing her job. The roles of the VP is to preside over the Senate, cast tie-breaking votes, and basically toe the line of the administration. And be dispatched by the president to do whatever the president needs the VP to do. And she did that. She was traveling the country a lot. She was speaking in a lot of places. I remember she did something in Louisiana. She went to some town in Acadiana and was talking about expanding internet to underserved communities. She was doing a lot of stuff as VP, and the White House never promoted it. And that hurt her going into 2024, especially because they didn't give her but 100 days. And because they had that disastrous idea to have a debate in June. For what reason? Would you have a debate in June? And if Joe Biden wasn't up for the debate, why y'all still let him go? That's the questions that I have. They should have canceled that debate. They should have been checking him to make sure he didn't have COVID. And then once the test came back positive, that should have been the end of that debate. He shouldn't even went there. So the White House didn't advertise what Kamala was doing, and people weren't searching for it. So that's how the narrative of her not doing anything got started. And now all of a sudden, people don't care about it because no one is doing the same thing to J.D. Vance. Nobody is asking what J.D. Vance is doing. Now, if I didn't know, I would say he wasn't doing anything. But I know that Trump is not promoting what Vance is doing because it's all about Trump. And if Vance is doing anything, I don't know what he's doing. And I'm not going to search to find out because I don't want him in my timeline. But it's just striking to me that nobody seems to care what, especially the same people who were saying that about Kamala. You're not saying the same thing about Vance. Now, people cared enough about what Kamala Harris was doing to notice that they weren't seeing her, but apparently didn't care enough to go and search for it and find it. And then use it as a reason to throw her out of office and deny her the presidency. That's what people always doing to black people. And I'm getting tired of it. We are always held to impossible standards, especially black women. Black women mostly, but black men too, are always held to impossibly high standards. We have to perform twice as well to get half of the accolades. And it's funny because you traded in Joe Biden and Kamala Harris for Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. And now look at what they have done. They tore down half the White House. The government has been shut down for, I don't lost count on how many days now. People not getting their SNAP benefits for November. All because they would rather raise people's premiums to triple what they was rather than negotiate with the Democrats to keep the government open. They just proven time and time again how much they don't care about you, how much they don't care about even their supporters. They keep saying, oh, it's the welfare queens that's on SNAP. Black people is only 20-something% of SNAP recipients. You want to know who the majority is? White people. Ain't that a bitch? And I bet you a large portion of that is their supporters. And they don't even care. So y'all wanted out. Y'all wanted out in 2024. But I bet you wish it had enough. That's all for now. Like, comment, subscribe, and follow at Pragmotiv News everywhere to stay prag-motivated. Also, remember you can find us across major platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Audible, and iHeartRadio so that you can listen to us even when you're on the go. So head on over there now and leave a review because it really helps us out. Quickly before I go, I just wanted to say one thing. Trey and I really appreciate y'all's support. We thank y'all so much. And one more thing. We will not have an episode for Monday. We sorry, y'all. We are taking some much needed time off, and we will be back on Tuesday. So see y'all then.